Duvid here. We are live. Happy Hanukkah. It is the seventh night, the seventh day of Hanukkah. I'll be lighting my very soon for the eighth night. So I'll say a few words of the meaning of Hanukkah and I'll chant some. So I have about an hour till I light my Hanukkah candles. And I was going to stream last night. I apologize. I'd scheduled it, and I hope for my new program to start regularly Saturday nights. And it just happened to be that I wasn't feeling very well, God forbid. And so I put it off till today. Make a quick bracha. Yeah, so unfortunately, I wasn't feeling all that great, and wasn't able to stream. It was very cold here, like 0 degrees. People know the weather in the United States. But yeah, I did a lot of research. Hopefully, I have some interesting things. I think this subject I know quite a bit about, and there's actually not that much good material on. And it's probably also at the center of my identity crisis, why I'm an old bachelor, and a whole bunch of explanation of who Duvid is, because, say my identity, I'm a Hasidic Jew. But, what does it mean to be a Hasidic Jew? What does it mean for that identity? And, it's the disputed identity. Thinking, Duvid's a half Jew, which, saying you can't be a half Jew and a Hasidic Jew at the same time, or your various difficulties in understanding the identity. And, also Hasidicus, to a large extent, is an ethnicity that you could even consider Hasidic Jewry like a sub-race, a sub-ethnicity of Ashkenazic Jewry, where Hasidic Jewry are very close ethnically to each other. In most Orthodox Jewish sects and Hasidic sects, most Hasidim are related to each other very closely. That are intermarried, are second, third, fourth, fifth cousins with almost everybody in the congregation. That they come from towns in Eastern Europe, where the Hasidic name comes from, Bobov, Ger, Satmar, Belz, Lubavitch, Stolin, so on and so on. I'll talk more about it. Are basically all these towns in Eastern Europe, and most of the Hasidim are like a sub-ethnic group of people who come from those areas that are intermarried with each other. And that's really also the case for Orthodox Jews in general, even the yeshivish movement. So, I was going over my library the last few streams, and I covered the Hasidus and Kabbalah, and I wanted to talk more about Judaism because of the area that I studied. And so, maybe I had minor disappointments that since I never got a rabbinic post, I never got a foothold within the Jewish community. So that's kind of why I got involved in YouTube. YouTube as an alternative voice. But at the same time, this has basically been the main area of my study for my whole adult life. I spent 5 years full time in basically yeshiva study in Israel and New York. 10 years where I was extremely involved in the Hasidic movement, and then even the last 10 years in Michigan, where I worked together with Chabad and Downtown Synagogue and other Jewish organizations. But I studied Torah and Hasidus and followed up with the Hasidic community through social media, and then God forbid, got involved with arguing with counter-Semites. So I wanted to go kind of more mainstream with just an overview of important Judaic topics, and I've consumed most of the stuff on YouTube. Saying the majority of the historical lectures, like Sam Aronoff, Henry Abramson, the Judaic study institutes all over the world, symposiums on the history of Hasidism. It's not a well understood topic, nor is the history of Judaism. Who are the Jews, and where did the Hasidic movement arise? It was separate the history of the people, the Hasidic people. You would say that David's Ashkenazic Jew. It's likely that some of my Jewish ancestry from the Ukraine were Hasidic. That David's descended from Hasidic Jews, but also from German Jews and only a half Jew. So who are the Hasidic people that you see in Brooklyn, in Israel? The current politics, where, so to say, Hasidim are going to be back in power, and I'll talk about that. Also, like the Agudas Yisrael, United Torah Judaism, where you have the coalition of Hasidim into a voting bloc and representatives of Hasidim that will be in power again, likely with the new coalition under Netanyahu, and the meaning of that to Israeli politics, to also Brooklyn, greater New York, where you have hundreds of thousands of Hasidim, where David was involved with the Hasidic community, serving Rebbes, some community activism. You have things like the yeshiva and state issues, God forbid, like Mitzvah Valpeh, yeshiva education, the right to raise children as they see fit, English as a second language, cultural, multicultural, differences to the origins, to say basically all Hasidim come from Eastern Europe. And I'm going to go into detail about that. And then there's also the Hasidic ideas. So within the history of Hasidim, you have a few main parts. You have the people, and basically Hasidim it's a Jewish revival movement where almost all Hasidim were Eastern European Jews that took to the Hasidic lifestyle and fell under the Hasidic leadership. The Hasidic leadership were basically the rabbinic class in Poland. So it wasn't necessarily like an overthrow of the rabbinic class. It was a movement that took over a section of the rabbinic class. But the rabbinic class that makes up the Hasidic leadership is basically the same historical rabbinic class. There might be a handful of people, like David, who studied Hasidus, but there's a few Rebbes or prominent Hasidic people that came from so to say lower birth, the lower ranks, and rose to rabbinic leadership and creating their own dynasties. But the vast majority of the Hasidic leadership were the historical rabbinic class that just prescribed to the Hasidic teachings, and then it changed the method of rabbinic communal life in Eastern Europe, leading up to really the pogroms. And say up until the late 1800s, Hasidism was basically exclusively to Eastern Europe, and you had some centers in Hungary, modern-day Hungary, and Poland, like Warsaw and Prague, where you had urban centers of Hasidus. But Hasidus, for its first 150 years, is mostly in the countryside in Eastern Europe and in a few major centers in Eastern Europe leading up to the pogroms, where you have the movement of Hasidim westward into London, areas of Germany, France, and the United States. But it was rather minimal. So say after the first pogroms in Russia in like the 1890s, in the mass exodus of Jews to America, where you had a few million Eastern European Jews that came to America, a lot of those were of Hasidic background, but most of them assimilated to America, and the rabbinic class largely doesn't come to America until after World War II. So I'm going to cover these things. They're all a little bit complicated. I have some visuals, and if there's questions, and maybe I'll get through my own thoughts to clarify this. There's been some scholarship in really the last 10 years, like a secular scholarship of Hasidus, because Hasidus, like of the rabbis and the preachers who created movements and of the dynasties, the legends of Hasidim, the miracle workers, the mystical Kabbalistic concepts, that the history of Hasidus, like I was mentioning, the biography of the sages, is essentially legends of rabbis. And the Hasidic identity is largely a legendary identity. Like the Baal Shem Tov and his students, and miracle workers, and this grounded in Kabbalistic Orthodox Judaism and understanding, versus a secular history that assumes that, God forbid, these teachings weren't true, the legends are inaccurate, and people were just people that may have been great leaders to certain extents, but it was just what they believed in. That for whatever reason, the Eastern European Hasidic Jews believed in this stuff and fell into these social structures, political structures, and so you have more modern, in the last 10 years, and I've showed some of my books in the last week's tour of my library, about the scholarship of the Hasidic people, of not so much what did we believe, but what was the circumstances, how do we organize, what were the sociology of Hasidim, and the political implications, and the organizational structures, and not focusing so much on the belief. And so the belief is also a very important topic, and I'm going to go into detail about the belief pattern, and some of that I'll cover today. And if this is well received, I will try to turn this into a series. I might also maybe next week talk about the history of Kabbalah, and that one will be more ideas, but kind of a historical overview. So to set the tone, I have screen shares for this, and I'm going to light my Hanukkah candles in about an hour. So let me chant. I'm going to chant a Hasidic niggin, which is a tune. And a big aspect of Hasidus is communal lifestyle and chanting and ecstatic prayer and more transcendental belief. Like, if this stuff is really true, what does it mean to really believe that we're talking to God, that God, so I'll get more into that. So let me just chant something to set the tune, and then I'll start with my screen share. So I'm going to do two different tunes. I've chanted them before, from Psalm 42, verse 2 and 3. Kayil taro galafike mayim kain nafshi saro galech Elohim. As the young deer searches for water, so too does my soul strive for God. Samu nafshi Elohim le'elchai musai vo ve'reya panei Elohim. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? So these are two tunes. The first one is a popular Vishnitz tune that the Total Sovereign Yitzchak Rebbe used to sing. And then I'll do, I think it's an older Hasidic tune. It's popular like in Satmar, Rimanover Rebbe. It's a pretty well-known, they've chanted even a pretty well-known Hasidic tune. But outside of Hasidim, and we'll talk about Chabad also in the origins, and in so here in Michigan we have Chabad Hasidim and some Hasidim, so these tunes are not well known outside of Hasidim. So Psalm 42, verse 2 and 3. Ki ayil tarok alafi kemayim kebebe nafshi sarog elechu Elohim ki ayil tarok alafi kemayim kebebe nafshi sarog elechu Elohim. Tzamu nafshi Lailoim Lubu Chai Musai Savoy Veya Pnei Elohim Ya mama Tzamu nafshi Leilohim Lo Chai Musai Avoy Veireya Pnei Elohim. So I'll do one more. This is they sing it in Satmar. I think it's an older tune. It might even go back to the beginning of Hasidus. This Vizhnitz tune that I just sung, Tolsar Mitzkak Rebbe used to chant it. Probably goes back like 100, 150 years. But if the, like in Brooklyn or, greater Hasidic center, there's people who know the origins of these tunes. And I'll talk more about the importance of chanting to Hasidus in music. Kayol Taroi Alafike Moyim Alafike Moyim Kenafshi Sarok Eilechu Elohim Tzamu nafshi Leilohim Tzamu nafshi Leilohim Tzamu nafshi Leilohim Luel Chai Musayovoy Ve'oreya B'nei Elohim Musayovoy Ve'oreya B'nei Elohim. So that one's kind of meant to be shouted, like I'll talk about Karlin Stolen also, and the people who yelled their prayers in Shlomi Karliner. But I've chanted that together, Satmar and Yerushalayim, where there are hundreds of people, like in the words itself, Samu Nafshi, my soul thirsts for God, and so you put all your force into it. So I'll do one quick, since I have Psalm 42 open here. So verse 12, this is the famous Sklener tune. Ma toishtaki nafshi umathem ulai hoichili lailahim kiyoidodani Yeshua's panavai. Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why moanst cry sorrow within me? Hope towards God and praise God, the salvation from the face of our God. So these words are repeated in L'chad Dodi from this verse in Psalms, saying, "Why are you down? Hope to God. God will bring us salvation." In this famous Sklener tune that was also semi-regularly chanted at Tolsar Yitzchak. Ma'ati shtoichachi nafshi imatem ulai. Ma'ati shtoichachi nafshi imatem ulai. Oy chili lai loichim. Oy chili lai loichim. Ki yahoy deni. Yeshios punai vai loikai. Oy chili lai loichim. Oy chili lai loichim. Ki ahoyoideni Yeshiyus punavai loikai Matish toichachi nafshi Imatehem miulai Matish toichachi nafshi Imatehem miulai Hovoichi lai loikim Oichi lai loikim Ki ahoyoideni Yeshiyus punavai loikai Hovoichi lai loikim Oichi lai loikim Ki ahoyoideni Yeshiyus punavai loikai. Okay, so just to set the mood to talk about Hasidus, you do a little Hasidic chanting, and anyone who's Hasidic might be familiar with those tunes. So let me do some screen shares, and this is very important. This graph here, I've showed it before in other of my Ask the Rabbis to understand Hasidus and the origins of Hasidus, because who are the Hasidic people? Where did we come from? Why are there so many of us? What are the demographics in Jewry? To understand the population estimates of historical Judaism. Surely, safe. Thanks for showing up. Happy Hanukkah. So if you notice in the chart, you have two peaks of about 5 million people, and these are estimates of the period of King Solomon and the greatest glory of Israel in the First Temple period, about 900 BC, where there's estimates that there was possibly up to 5 million Jews, almost all exclusively in Israel, to the period of the destruction of the Second Temple, where here the estimate is there's about 4.4 million Jews, in about half in Israel and half in the Middle East, mostly that would have been Africa, Alexandria, North Africa through Babylon. And then the destruction of the Second Temple, where, God forbid, maybe half of the Jewish people would have been killed, and eventually almost no Jews living in Israel, to the number being possibly at most a few 100,000 that would have remained in Israel, and through about 1,000 AD, that the vast majority of Jews would have been in the Middle East and North Africa through the period of the rise of Islam. And then as Islam, where the center of Israel is in Babylon, the yeshivas in Surya and Pumbedita in Iraq, and then with the golden age of Islam and moving into Spain, that the first Jews came into Europe. There might have been a handful of Jews in Europe and Rome, or Rabbinic traders, or some people within Spain, but the number would have been less than 100,000 till the period of the Rishonim, where you have Jews in Italy and Spain and France, possibly numbering about 200,000. So according to the best estimates, there were less than 1 million Jews, maybe a period like 1 million, but not many more than 1 million Jews till about 1700. And even till about 1750, there were the total population of Jews was relatively stable after the destruction of the Second Temple till this population explosion in Eastern Europe that we're going to talk about, was relatively stable, of about 1 million Jews, and the majority were in North Africa and the Middle East, including some in Israel, although the number in Israel was the minority, that there was less than probably 100,000 Jews in Israel from after the Bar Kokhba revolts till the modern creation of the state of Israel. There are probably less than 100,000 Jews in Israel for almost 1,800 years, and in about 1200 you get about 100,000 Jews in Europe, and in the early Rishonim period that would have been mostly in Spain, in France, in Germany, and Jews move already up into England, was not many. The main Jewish center of Rashi and the Bali Tosfos, the Rishonim. You have some in Italy, but mostly in Spain and France and Germany. And then God forbid, like the 109 expulsions for basically the period from the whole time Jews were in Europe. There were always expulsions. The whole time Jews were in Western Europe, in Spain, France, Germany, England, that Jews never had rest. That, God forbid, like the 109 expulsions, like 90 of those are in Western Europe. Most of them are in Germany and France. Like 70 of the expulsions of Jews are in different areas in Germany and France. Saying Jews were expelled, I think twice from England, for the Spain, but most of those expulsions were from areas in France and Germany, God forbid, leading up to Glenn and DeWield. Thanks for tuning in. If you have interesting things to share in the chat, so that this is just important to understand the Hasidic movement, the origins of Hasidim, to understand the origins of Jews. That why Hasidim is almost exclusively a movement of Eastern European Jews, and to say how did Jews get to Eastern Europe and why were there so many of us there. And I'm still giving the preamble up to the entrance of Jews into Poland. I think it's Kazimar. So you have the plague, God forbid, hundreds of years off and on of the plague, and a lot of times there's a connection between the plague and expulsions of Jews. And so Jews are being bounced around in France, Germany, and Spain for hundreds of years. And then you have the Spanish expulsion. But most, like the plague is really devastating, and there's horrible anti-Semitism and expulsions of the Jewish population. Questions: who are these people? Why are they here? The church councils, and so about 1300, the Polish Empire, and I think it's Kazimar. I forget if to look this up. Got it. Thanks for tuning in. Makes a power play to invite the Jews. The Jews keep on getting bounced around and expelled from the various municipalities. There wasn't really a unified. There were periods of a unified empires, but most of the time there were fighting kingdoms and rival kingdoms in France and Germany, and Jews keep on getting bounced around and getting invited from one place and then kicked out, and then moving to other places. And it would appear that Jews desire to be in Western Europe, and for whatever reason, we had difficulties there. We kept on getting expelled in pogroms and the Crusades, and Kazimar and the Polish Empire makes a power move to welcome Jews into the kingdom. And we'll talk about the structure and why the structure of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire was so conducive to the population explosion of Jews, where you see the population goes from about 1.5 million to almost over 15 million before, God forbid, World War II and the Holocaust. That like in really a 200-year period, the Jewish population goes from 2 million to 16 million, and almost all of it occurs in Eastern Europe. And so it's interesting to say 14 million Jews when that's 14 million out of 16 million total Jews in the world are in Eastern Europe. And so there's a power play starting in the 1300s to allow Jews into Eastern Europe. And then there's continued difficulties, expulsions in mainstream Europe. So after the Spanish expulsion of 1492, and basically across France and Germany, Jews were expelled from England in I think it's 1096. Jews were expelled twice, like in and then 1270 also, and so there were a handful of continuous Jewish settlements in Germany and France. Like my mother's maiden name Bamberg had Jews from the founding of Jews in Bamberg till about the 12th century. There was always tens of Jews in Bamberg. Bamberg had periods of pogroms, the Crusades, and the plague, and waxed and waned in population. But for example, Bamberg, Germany, had Jews continuously for 800 years. I think there's still Jews there today, even after World War II and the Holocaust. Through the World War II, there remained a handful of Jews there, but most of the settlements in Europe, going up to about 1600 in Western Europe, didn't have more than a few hundred Jews. And Paris, there's expulsion of Jews, the burning of the Talmud, Yechilma Paris, and the Rishonim, and the continual conditions of expulsions, changing leadership, Jews bouncing around from one town to another, didn't allow for the population of Jews to be large in Eastern Europe, in Western Europe. So even though there were hundreds of Jewish settlements, maybe even thousands of small Jewish settlements across Western Europe, France, and Germany, that they never really got more than a few hundred Jews. And a lot of times, the Jewish community would have been completely expelled, or left to just a handful, or would have fully assimilated, converted to Christianity, like in Spain and Italy. So around the 1500s, and you could see here that around 1600, so you have the Maharal of Prague, which now is modern day Hungary. This is 1573, and the famous rabbi most known for the Golem establishes the academy, Eastern Europe in Prague, which is now Hungary, but was part of this larger Polish-Lithuanian Empire. You have kind of like a safe haven in Eastern Europe. Still, the majority of the tourist center is, so after the expulsion, you have a very tiny settlement of Jews in Amsterdam, and then also going back to Israel and Sfas, which we'll talk, like in the time of Kabbalah, we'll talk about the Arizal and the Smicha controversy in Sfas, and the Turkish, the Ottoman Empire. But basically, after the expulsion of the Jews, you have a small settlement in Amsterdam, almost no major Jewish centers across France and Germany or England, and almost all of the Jewish centers in Europe end up on Eastern Europe. And that grows till, we'll mention, the Chmielnicki massacres of 1648. So you'll hear that, just the numbers. So how many Jews were slaughtered? So, the Jewish Encyclopedia claimed it could have been 100 to 3,000 Jews were killed during the Chmielnicki massacres, and just saying, well, how many Jews were there in, Eastern Europe? So if there's only tens of thousands of Jews in Western Europe, and by 1648, if around the 1550s, the majority of Jews that remained in Europe, the amount of Jews in Amsterdam was limited. There probably, wasn't more than, definitely not more than 20,000 Jews, maybe even less, maybe even only 5,000 Jews in Amsterdam. That So if there was 500,000 Jews in Eastern Europe in the time of the Chmielnicki massacres, the uprising, ironically today with modern Zelensky and Ukraine, that Chmielnicki is looked at kind of like the precursor of Ukrainian nationalism. But this is the downfall of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire, who were, once I finish this, I'll talk about the nature of the settlement, of how Jews were settled there, the nature of the politics and the sociology. But these numbers are disputed. Some people think it's only tens of thousands of Jews that were slaughtered in the Chmielnicki massacres, and most modern scholars think that there was probably only a few 100,000 Jews in Eastern Europe in that time, and tens of thousands, God forbid, were slaughtered in the Chmielnicki uprising. And then after the Chmielnicki uprising, shortly after you have Shabbatai Tzvi, and the false messiah, Shabbatai Tzvi, and you have a new settlement of your new agreement, but it's kind of the status quo where Jews are returned to the status quo, and the nature of Eastern European Jews were basically, I'll talk about the manor system and the nobility system and how the Jews fit into that. But after the Chmielnicki massacre uprising, Jews basically returned to the same status they had before, except under new nobility. And also interesting, I'm not going to talk about it too much today, you also have the rise of Freemasonry, and the Polish nobility up until like the 1800s, most of them are Freemasons. And there's a lot of change in territory in Eastern Europe. There's the Habsburg. There's periods where the Habsburgs control large amounts of Eastern Europe. There's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. There's the Russian Empire, and the borders on it keep on changing. However, the general nature of Jewish settlement stays the same, and it allows this mass population explosion of Jews. So here this has it 1736, and the establishment of the Hasidic and Misnagdic movements, the Baal Shem Tov and the Vilna Gaon and the Yeshiva movement. But basically you have these towns that are under the patronage of nobility. So Jews don't technically own land, don't really farm. So usually it's the non-Jews who are doing the farming, and the Jews have some sort of bidding tax assessment role where the Jews are merchants, run general stores, run inns and taverns, and are tax farmers for the nobility. So there was different periods, a different number of nobility. Also under Russia, for most of the time, there were noblemen, royalty that ran most of the territory, and they resided in castles or major urban areas. And there were towns across Eastern Europe that had, most of them, there really weren't any universally Jewish towns. Almost all the towns were a mixture of Jewish and non-Jewish, and it was almost caste in terms of professions. The Jews had certain professions, and the non-Jews had other professions. Most of the farming was done by non-Jews. A lot of the trade, what they call tax farming, collecting tax farming, and a lot of times that was bid. And this arrangement, what we call like the shtetl, where you had a Jewish section of town, of small towns, led to the possibility of the mass population explosion, to where you have close to 15 million Jews across Eastern Europe. Over 10 million of these Jews grew in a period of 200 years in mostly the Eastern European countryside, where you had a certain agreement where you had a shtetl, and you had, the city might have had like a church, some sort of regiment of the nobility that would have had some form of local knights and army encampment, and maybe like a blacksmith, a leather shop, or various things, and then you had farms ran by non-Jews, and then you had the Jewish section of really thousands. There's thousands of these towns. I'm going to show you maps to make it more clear, where you had thousands of these Jewish towns, and the Jews basically dominated. There's certain professions, money lending. There wasn't really that many like major banking. It was mostly low-level money lending. Merchants, which would have been like general store or traveling merchants, inns, and taverns. So a lot of like Hasidic folklore and alcoholism, and it served for the nobility. So like the nobility traveled, and they would stay at Jewish inns and taverns. So that you're talking like Mob Talk with John Wolfe, where Jews and prohibition in the U.S. But for hundreds of years in Eastern Europe, Jews dominated liquor and bars, and it was through royal charter. It was the agreement with the various nobility in Russia and Poland that the Jews ran the inns and taverns. They collected the taxes from the farmers, and they manned the general stores. And there might have occasionally been like a pogrom, because generally the Jews weren't militaristic. They didn't serve in the military. They weren't Christians. They weren't eligible anyways. And so there would have been certain small military encampments or rampaging of military groups that, if they went through the Jewish section of town, God forbid, could have easily killed, slaughtered, robbed all of the Jews. And that happened regularly. So a lot of times in hundreds of years of Eastern European history, the Jews might have a heads up that there's a local marauding band of knights or even the Crusades, that would be much earlier, coming through town, and the Jews would have abandoned town, besides maybe a handful of men, to like the next town or another safe area, and waited till the marauding band passed through and then came back, and would have had to pay off in bribes, and maybe a brave Jewish male would have manned the inn and the bar for the army to come through and give them a place to stay, and hope that they wouldn't, God forbid, rape and pillage the women, and steal everything from the general store. But it's a general trend that Jews were able to work out agreements basically everywhere in Eastern Europe for these kind of like caste system. And Jews also had other professions like tailors and levels of craftsmen. So you had kind of this tiered economy where you had small towns that were a mix between non-Jewish and Jewish. The non-Jewish would have been Christian. There would have been a church there. The church would have been affiliated with the army encampment, and there would have been questionable relations. There always would have been taxes. The Jews would have always had to pay taxes to the nobility, but largely the Jews were left alone in their sections of town enough that they were able to multiply to being close to 10 million Jews, over 10 million Jews in Eastern Europe. In the estimated in 1880, before the first pogroms, and a few million Jews leave Eastern Europe for America and certain parts of Western Europe where we're allowed to migrate into, that some say as high as 90% of all Jews live in Eastern Europe population-wise. That, if you're looking at the chart, like the orange section is Jews that would have been in the Middle East and North Africa and Israel, and less than a million. So, going up till about 1900, there's less than a million Jews everywhere else in the world besides Eastern Europe. And, so it's pretty crazy to think about the demographics that up to about 1900, there were only a million Jews around the world that weren't in Eastern Europe. And then there were about 15 million Jews in Eastern Europe. And then you have the first pogroms in 1890, where millions of Jews leave Eastern Europe for Western Europe and America, and then God forbid the Holocaust. To now, there's very few Jews in Eastern Europe, only hundreds of thousands of Jews, less than a million Jews left in Eastern Europe, maybe Russia. There might be 2 million Jews in all of Eastern Europe and Russia today, from like the 15 million of 100 years ago. So this is just very important, a precursor for the rise of the Hasidic movement to, why is it that all the Jews were in Eastern Europe? And then also that the Hasidic movement is a precursor to this population explosion. There's certain reasons why you never had population explosions of Jews anywhere else in the world. And the Hasidic structure of Hasidic communal life allowed massive population, because generally Orthodox Jews have an R selection, have large families, and so it was necessary to these conditions for the population explosion. And it's very hard to understand the histories. Well, aren't Jews from Israel? Jews are the descendants of the biblical prophets. So why did 90% of the descendants of the biblical prophets live in Eastern Europe? And so if you accept, Ashkenazic Jews have some admixture of European blood, but just the history that the Jewish population was always generally quite small, about 1 million people globally, and it was this conditions in Eastern Europe that the Hasidic movement was part of that allowed this mass population explosion into close to 20 million Jews, leading into the Holocaust and even today. So now in Israel, there's been the conditions for not a population explosion, but now there's millions. Maybe there's about 5 million worldwide Sephardic Mizrahi Jews, and most of that population came after the foundation of Israel, where Mizrahi Sephardic Jews in Israel were able to have large families and exponentially grow. And then some of those Sephardic communities migrated to America, like in Brooklyn or New Jersey, where there may be hundreds of thousands of them, or like Persian Jews, that these population explosions are modern. And even Sephardic Jews, like Sephardic Jews in America, and settlements like the Sephardic Jews that were in Amsterdam, the Sephardic Jews that were in America, never had population explosions. They were, it's unclear. Like I said, in Amsterdam, it's unlikely there were more than 10,000, maybe only 5,000 Sephardic Jews there. And of the early settlements of Jews in America, none of these settlements really had many more than 10,000 Jews. Even when the German Jews started coming over, it wasn't, the population explosion comes from Eastern European Jews. And even today, kind of like the R selection. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, where you have what happened in Eastern Europe, where Jews became very R selected and had a stable communal structure. I've talked a lot about this with Luke 4. So it was a little bit of a long ramble, but so that's extremely important for understanding the growth of the Hasidic movement. So let me just link that. So this is pretty important, and I've shared it before and other things, and I said that just to understand that the Jewish population globally really was less than 1 million people for most of history, and this population to get more than 10 million Jews was somewhat a one-time phenomenon. And even in America, where you have so many Jews, most of them, the communities are stable and they're descended from Eastern European Jews. So now I'm going to get into the actual start of the Hasidic movement. Here's the Chabad page that has, some Hasidic personalities like the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mizrich, and the first Chabad Rebbe, Levi Berdichever, and then the lineage of Lubavitch rabbis till today. Those are the most well-known Hasidic rabbis because they, spread the earth and did outreach, although that wasn't always the case. And we'll see interesting that in the beginning it was like Aaron Karliner who did so much outreach. And here, if people know Hebrew, some of the early works on Sefaria of Hasidic works of the Baal Shem Tov and Kesser Shem Tov. So just share those. I'm not going to be covering too much Hasidic philosophy today or the Hasidic text, more the general history. So let's look a little bit, this link here of, so I was mentioning after the Chalmeki uprising, you have an overturn of the previous state of affair. I'm going to talk about the Rabbinic Council and how the Jews, were citizens. The Jews, were subjects of the nobility. They didn't have citizenship, and they were under rabbinic control and patronage that they had to pay the nobility for the right to live on the land, and they were taxed, and it was always subject to renegotiation until you have the first emancipation of the Jews in France, where Jews get full citizenship. So let me just read this, like the rise of the Hasidic rabbinate. Then you have Shabbatai Tzvi as a messianic movement, and the Hasidism could also be somewhat messianic, but it would appear, Shabbatai Tzvi is really the first Zionist, because Shabbatai Tzvi is essentially leading Jews back to Israel. And the Hasidic movement, we'll see that there's some Hasidim that go back to Israel, but generally the Hasidic movement establishes a way of life to live in Europe and sets the path for population explosion in Europe. And although there was movement, there was a handful of the first disciples moved to Israel, and there was always some back and forth of the rabbis in Israel. The Hasidic movement is somewhat anti-Zionist and established itself as a European movement. So let's just look at this, just do a little reading. The church incitement against Jews in the Middle Ages led to anti-Jewish treachery that was accompanied by expulsions and murder throughout Western and Central Europe between the 13th and 17th centuries. Out of the despair of the Jews, false messiahs appeared, David Ilori, David Ruvini, Shlomo Molcho, Shabbatai Tzvi, and Jacob Frank, and others. During the time the hub of Jewish life moved from Western to Central Europe eastwards, there were Jews who lived under relatively better conditions, at least from the standpoint of the rights granted to them. There are ups and downs with severe poverty and crowded living conditions, especially in the isolated towns and outlying villages, along with periodic pogroms. Into this background, Hasidism and its founder, Israel ben Eliezer Baal Shem Tov, 1700 to 1760, was born. As with the false messiahs, Hasidism spread rapidly, and not only among the simple people, as everyone anticipated some type of tidings. The flames of Hasidism engulfed rabbis and scholars, and it soon became a viable worldwide movement. In the article's first part, we will give a short overview of Hasidism and of the movement that opposed it. In the second part, which appeared separately, we will study Hasidic dynasties and the sub-dynasties that have developed to our own day. So background to the growth of Hasidism, conditions that pervaded after the Chalmeki pogroms of the 1648 and 49, along with the disturbances that occurred in southwest Poland, caused the Jews of the region to fear for the continued existence of their communities, their very lives, and their future As in the past, one result of the mortal danger they faced was the turning to religion and the quest for remedy, specifically in those areas shrouded in mysticism, Kabbalah, and Messianism. The longing for the anticipated redemption overwhelmed the people, and the atmosphere that created provided fertile ground for the development of Messianism. Even before these events, the city of Sfad had a community numbering more than 15,000 Jews firmly grounded in religion and economically secure. Active were Rabbi Jacob Barab, head of the Sephard scholars, Rav Yosef Karo, 1488 to 1575, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Moshe Cordova, 1522 to 1570, known as the Ramak, and his disciple, Rav Isaac Luria Ashkenazi, 1534 to 1574, known as the Holy Ari. They authored the systematic commentaries of the Kabbalah. Their teachings spread rapidly in Italy, Turkey, and Poland, where they fell on fertile ground. Along with the failure of the Messianic movements, the diffusion of their teachings contributed to the rapid spread of Hasidism from the area of its birth, Podolia, to the Ukraine, Moldavia, Romania, Galicia, and the Habsburg territories, Poland, Lithuania, and White Russia. Over time and through immigration, it spread to other community centers like Eretz Yisrael in the United States. The great success of Hasidism, in contrast to the Messianic movements, all of which failed, was due to the fact that Hasidism, one could find spiritual salvation, while the movements of the false prophets promised physical salvation, mass aliyah to Israel, and safety from attack, none of which they could deliver. When one speaks of the Hasidic movement, one must immediately mention the movement that arose in opposition to it, the Misnagim. Each of these two movements had a leader whose name became synonymous with the movement itself. Both leaders were strong-willed and forceful, charismatic, with keenly forged mental powers and perseverance, factors that subsequently gave rise to legends and stories told in their names, the Baal Shem Tov and the Gaon of Vilna. Rav Israel, the son of Eliezer, popularly known as the Baal Shem Tov, was born in Okap, Ukraine. His father, an honest and God-fearing man, died when he was very young. The community considered itself obligated to provide him with education and trusted him as a teacher. With time, he became a Samish in the synagogue, where he spent the nighttime hours studying Kabbalah. He married when he was 18 years old, but his wife died a short time after their marriage. He wandered from place to place and settled in the area of Brody, where he became the teacher of young children. With this honesty and wisdom, he also attracted the Jews of the region, who utilized him to arbitrate their disputes. His personality impressed one of the local people, Ephraim of Kuti. He became close to him and even promised him his daughter Hannah's hand in marriage. But Ephraim died a short time later, and his son, Rav Avram Gershon, tried to convince Hannah not to marry him, but she chose to marry him despite her brother's objection. Israel wanted to spare his brother-in-law, Rav Avram Gershon, who was a notable scholar, any embarrassment, so he left Kuti with his wife and settled in the Carpathian Mountains. There, the couple lived in isolation and earned a meager living. Israel spent his time in prayer and meditation. While learning the healing powers of the various wild herbs, he tried his hand in assorted activities. He was a shoykid, an innkeeper, wrote prescriptions and amulets, and spoke to the masses of people about the fear of God and love of Torah. The family eventually moved to Mezebich. He not only attracted the simple people, but also, over time, both the educated and scholars drew towards him. However, only when he won the heart of Rev Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mizrich, 1704 to 1773, did his movement of Hasidism begin to succeed, and the Mezebich became its center. The Baal Shem Tov brought to the Hasidic movement his experience of many years of knowledge of nature and the wild, and especially human nature. It should be stated that with the development of a new movement, before it adopted standards and behavior and norms of practice, its fringes invariably attracted those who tossed aside any restraint, a mixed bag of people hitching a ride on the movement's wagon. We learned this through a letter sent by Rav Shner Zalman of Leidi to Rav Avram Kalish, in which he reviews the poor rapport between them. And so I'm going to skip some of this. In 1736, the Baal Shem Tov was discovered to have supernatural powers after years of healing people through amulets, and especially with natural herbs and curative plants, whose benefits he learned in his years of solitude in the Carpathian Mountains. He was then 36 years old. He moved to Mezebich, where he established himself, his good name and his good reputation as a healer of the sick, supplier of help to the oppressed, provided of support and charity to the poor, More and more individuals, especially from the simple people, but not only them, began to gather in his presence. Stories and legends about his miraculous powers and his righteousness became widespread, and the number of his disciples and those who came to hear his teachings increased. Among them were first-rate rabbis and scholars such as Rabbi Mendel of Vitebsk and Shneur Zalman of Lodi, but all this was only after he won over Rav Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mizrich. So the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was an expert in the Kabbalah, and the commentaries of Rav Isaac Lurie of the Zohar were his guiding light. He was more interested in the practical aspects rather than the esoteric and speculative side of Kabbalah. He studied philosophical works, especially those from the Middle Ages, and was influenced by them. The Maggid of Mizrich worked hand in hand with the Besht in educating the second and third generations of Hasidic leaders who joined them, accepting their teachings and established dynasties. Those disciples of the Besht, the second generation of the Maggid of Mizrich, third generation, and here you have a long list of disciples. People could look on the link. So of note, the Maggid of Mizrich was crippled and was not able to travel. The Baal Shem Tov traveled hundreds of miles, thousands of miles across Eastern Europe, and his stories of his travels are recorded in the subject of legends, as opposed to the Maggid of Mizrich was physically crippled and incapable of moving. So Mizrich became the center of gatherings for Sabbath gatherings, of prayer, and of studies. So people who wanted to study under the Baal Shem Tov went to Mizrich. And some of them traveled around with the Baal Shem Tov, and then with the Maggid of Mizrich, you had the idea of sending these disciples to set up courts, and these courts, somewhat turned into Rabbinic dynasties that parallel the royal system. So the courts established by the above rabbis and the courts that were established by the following generations, and I'll look briefly at part 2, and then there's the struggle with the Misnagdim in the Haskalah of Moshe Mendelssohn, and I'll look briefly here at part 2. Let me share this. The Hasidic Rabbinate. First part of this article presented the historical background concerning the birth of the foundation of the Hasidic movement and the person responsible for its formation, the Baal Shem Tov and his early collaborators. We discussed some aspects of the rivalry between the newly conceived movement and the counter movement, the Mitnagdim, under the direct leadership of Rav Eliyahu Chassid the Gaon, and also listed the names of the members of the second and third generations of the movement. In the second part, we will discuss the latter generations, describe the organization of the movements, the dynasties. Against all odds, especially the opposition of the Mitnagdim rabbis, the Hasidic movement took off and found appeal among the underprivileged people in the small towns and villages of the Pale settlement who were deprived of any social, cultural, and financial status. The movement that started in Podolia spread through Ukraine, Galicia, Moldavia, Romania, and the near vicinity, and to the more distant Austro-Hungary, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, and Russia. As Israel ben Eliezer, the Besht, is considered the founder of the movement, his disciples are considered the second generation. The generation includes Rav Dov Ber, known as the Maggid of Mizrich. Later generations, senior to the Besht and accomplished, second to the Besht in accomplishments, who helped the Baal Shem Tov educate and indoctrinate the second generation of disciples, mostly accomplished rabbis themselves, who, excited by the new movement, came and joined it. Rav Dov Ber was the teacher of the second and third generations of Hasidic rabbis as well, while they in turn were masters of the fourth, and so on. 8 generations can be traced from the time of the Baal Shem Tov up until the present day. Each generation there were disciples that stood out and had the appeal, charisma, and stamina to form and head Hasidic dynasties, some of which are still viable today. On the other hand, there were disciples who did not form Hasidic dynasties, and their names in the first and second generation were given Hasidic dynasties. The following distribution of dynasties, according to the generations and the names of their founders, is based on Elfasi. The succession of generation is given below. Rav Dov Ber is the teacher of the second and third generations mentioned above. Many of his disciples founded their own schools, established dynasties, and were surrounded by followers. A few of them became teachers themselves, and their disciples became the teachers and leaders of new dynasties of the subsequent generations. The teachers in each generation are marked with an asterisk. The list of the dynasties contain about 100 original dynasties, each headed by an admor with its original location. Some of the dynasties were small and localized, while others enjoyed thousands of followers and were spread over many towns. They formed sub-dynasties headed by new admorim, who were sons, son-in-laws, or relatives of the main admor, and the sub-dynasty was named after the location of the new admor. For instance, one of the largest and most viable dynasties, the Tversky dynasty of Chernobyl, was subdivided over 30 secondary, tertiary, etc. dynasties. Most of the Tversky admorim perished in the Holocaust. The few who survived restored the dynasty and reside today in New York, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Montreal, London, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Bnei Brak. Another modern-sized but less prominent, but not less important dynasty is that of the Hagers of Kussau, with sub-dynasties established in New York, Monsey, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Bnei Brak, which also includes Vishnitz, so the tune that I chanted. Two Hasidic movements, Chabad and Breslov, did not promote the dynasty concept through sub-dynasties. The Chabad movements of Roshneir, Zalman, Ladi remained as centralized, organized with one admor at its head. At his death, he was replaced by a new admor. However, Chabad made extensive use of shlichim, emissaries or envoys sent by the rabbi to remote or less remote places in order to bring the message of the organization and the rabbi to those places. Chabad became large, perhaps the largest and most influential Hasidic movement. Chabad is unique within the Hasidic movement and differs in many other ways from the regular dynasties. The Bratslav Hasidic dynasty, founded by Rav Nachman of Breslov, 1772 to 1810, a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, did not establish a dynasty. Rav Nachman was a unique personality and high qualities and appeal. Later in his life, he moved to Uman, where he eventually died. His followers did not install, after his death and to this present, any new rabbi to lead them. The Bratslav Hasidim is nevertheless an influential and growing movement today. The Admor. The principles of Hasidism mentioned in the first part state that the level of the God-fearing and righteous tzaddik, the highest level in approaching God, might be attained by prayer and total devotion to God. The person who attained this level would merit being the leader of the congregation and could mediate between God and the people. The tzaddik was the one in whom the people could confide, who would comfort them in their misfortunes and grief, advise them in their daily endeavors, and pray for them, bring them grievances before God, and share their happiness and rejoice in their feast. The tzaddik was admired and respected by the people and was thus awarded the title Admor, which is an acronym for Adonenu Morenu V'Rabbeinu, our master, teacher, and rabbi, and was affectionately called Rabbi or Rebbe out of respect, admiration, and esteem for the Rebbe. His followers named their newborn boys after him. They also formed around him a sort of court, which the Admor had its head. While most Admorim were humble and modest in their daily life and the relations with their follower, there were a few whose behavior was different. Rav Shlomo Shachna Dovber of Proshowitz, for example, after his father, the Maggid of Mezheridz, died, installed the regal style in his court with all the pomp and show, including changes in his clothing style. The son of Israel Friedman of Ruzhin, the founder of the Ruzhiner dynasty, and much respected figure by both Hasidim as Magnagnim, continue with the style. Reb Tzvi Hirsch Hager, the great-grandson and founder of the Kosovo dynasty, built for himself a large Beis Medrash, and his brother, Rav Yechiel Mikkel ben David Hager, built a big house where he was surrounded by his followers. Hasidim supported the Admor to the best of their ability and felt proud to be concerned for his well-being, and even the extent of making Hasidim of the other dynasties envious. While many attained the level of tzaddik and the title of Admor on their own merit and achievement, particularly in the earlier generations, in the later generation, the title was passed on by inheritance from father to son and was not necessarily based on scholastic record. Charisma was an additional factor that was considered when naming an Admor. There were also some extreme cases, such as Shlomo Ben Zion Tversky, who was named Admor of Chernobyl in the United States at the age of 13. An even more extreme case was that of Israel Ben Asher Perlo Stolen, who was orphaned at the age of 4 and became Admor at the age of 6 and was called the Eunuch of Stolen. He grew up to be a wise, educated rabbi versed in the sciences and accomplished composer and had thousands of followers. The behavior of that Morin was diverse. There were some that were detached from the people, lived in seclusion, prayer, meditation, and study, making provisions for receiving only those in need of consultation. On the other end, there were those who felt free to come to the community and communicate directly with the public and were easily accessible by their flock. And of course, there were those in between, many more in practice various forms of tzedakah, charitable deeds like pity and shavuot, redemption of prisoners, and support of the poor, with some even spending all their earnings on this. There were others with the eccentric and odd habits. So it goes on, and this also has, just look at the appendix of the list of generations, the students of the Baal Shem Tov and Dov Ber, and you can see the list of names. And so here's another one. Here's the Yivo one. I'm not going to read through this, but it's similar. The Yivo gives also a history of the movement. I showed my library, so high tea, happy Hanukkah. So hemorrhage my viewers reading through this, but I want to get a little academic. Here, Wikipedia, you can see a list of Hasidic dynasties. Today there's hundreds of them. And just a quick note, I forgot to mention, Chassid, the word Chassid is mentioned in the Talmud. It's from the word chesed of kindness, charity. It's usually translated as pious. In the Talmud, it refers to someone who goes above and beyond in order to not cause harm to other people, like the ahimsa principle, specifically referring to the example of someone who burns their fingernails, because God forbid, like the morning blessing, the superstition is that the soul at night when you go to sleep leaves through your hand and your fingernails, and they become impure because of that. And so first thing you wake up, neglavos, you wash your hands, in the mitzvah al natilas yadayim. So when you cut your fingernails, it's considered impure and capable of causing a miscarriage to women, God forbid. So the Talmud says that, God forbid, that fingernails, that if a woman steps on them, could have a miscarriage. And this is in the Talmud. So Talmud says a chassid is someone who burns their fingernails. So that God forbid that their fingernail could cause a woman to miscarry. And, so you usually cut your fingernails, flush it down the toilet or the sink. But you say the chassid burns their fingernails. And when I was in Israel in yeshiva for years, I used to burn my fingernails. Like I'd cut my fingernails, wrap it in a little piece of tissue, and take it outside and burn it. And that in the Talmud is the example it gives the definition of a chassid. Then in Germany, about the 1300, there's a book called Sefer Hasidim, and that's like the early pietist, and has some levels of extreme deprivations. And like in Hindu, Sanskrit, they call like tapasya, asceticism, fasting, rolling around in snow, self-flagellation. And so the Sefer Hasidim was these extreme measures of repentance and pietism. And so when I get into the disciples, the name Hasidim for the group of the Baal Shem Tov really comes in the third generation with, I think it's Rav Yechiel Mikkel of Slutsko that gives birth to the Goldman family. So the father-in-law of Aaron Karliner, I'll cover this in a minute, but he had a study circle where they studied Kabbalah and had long prayer services. And that was the first time the word Hasidism was used for the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. And many people claim it was actually the Misnagdim, the anti-Hasidic Jews, that made fun of the followers. That some people claim that the Baal Shem Tov called his followers the Bali Tshuva, the born-again Jews, the repentant Jews that were constantly repenting. And the Miznagim joking said, like, oh, the Hasidim, these people think they're so pious, and that name stuck, although the Baal Shem Tov himself never referred to him or his followers as Hasidim. But by the third generation, the title Hasidim stuck, and that till today, Hasidim are known as Hasidim. So let me do a quick PowerPoint just to try to get a little scholarship in here. And this has context and teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and Tali Lowenthal, who made her PowerPoint public. So the context, various Kabbalistic texts that the Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, the Ramban, Nachmanides, commentary on Torah. Most of the early Hasidic Rebbes, their teachings are found in commentaries on Torah, and like Hasidim, culturally had courts and gathering, and their main speeches were on Friday nights or Saturday morning related to the prayer service, and their speeches were commentaries on the Torah, so the recording of the weekly Torah portion. So the recording of their teachings are, like the earlier scholars, recorded in weekly sermons on the Torah portion. So here's the Sefer Hasidim, Rav Yehuda Chassid, the mystical piets of medieval Franco-Germany. Then you had the Sfas Center of Judaism after the Spanish expulsion, and Isaac Luria's Kabbalah, Moshe Cordova, the Pardes, Yosef Karo, the Eitz Chaim Vitel's writings of the teachings of the Arizal. And this concept that Kabbalah was known, but was not meant to be revealed. And the Hasidim, and we'll mention later if I have enough time, with the dispute between Rav Avram Kalisher and the Alter Rebbe or Schneur Zalman Schneerson about teaching Kabbalah to the masses, applying the teachings of Kabbalah to daily Jewish life. Another pre-Hasidic text, Reshis Chachma, popular Kabbalistic texts. The Shnei Luchas Abris from Isaac Halevi Horowitz, whose descendants convert to Hasidism and are dominant in the Hasidic today. I think the Boston Rebbe are descended from the Boston Rebbe Horowitz family are descended from the Shnei Luchas Abris. This is a pre-Hasidic text that is inspirational among the Hasidic movement. This sometimes they date to 1746, the Baal Shem Tov's mystical ascent to the upper realms, where supposedly the Baal Shem Tov has a dream or a prophecy and meets Messiah and asks Messiah when Messiah will come. He says, when your fountains burst forth to the outside, which kind of like Chabad as opposed to Shabbatai Tzvi, which would have pushed for Jews to return to Israel. The Baal Shem Tov was an expansionary movement where the idea was to spread the teachings, not to convince the Jews to return to Israel, but to spread the teachings all over the world, which is also in the Maimonides laws of Messiah. With Pinchas Kortzer, the first Hasidic book to be published, including numerous quotations and saying of the Baal Shem Tov that usually start with "as I heard from my teacher," and also include many stories of travel of the Baal Shem Tov. The Tzavos of Ravash are rules of upright conduct, daily living, proper like a halacha work, that more Hasidic as opposed to like the Shulchan Aruch, from like a Hasidic perspective of like hashkafa, the outlook of what it means to conduct yourself as a Chassid, the Kesser Shem Tov, that has Kabbalistic views of the Baal Shem Tov and creation, Tzimtzum, divine providence, the individual and God, the Jewish people. And maybe next time I will go more in Kabbalah. When I talk about Kabbalah, in the history of Kabbalah, I'll go more into this. I'm not going to talk too much about the Hasidic concepts and Kabbalah. Just the history alone is probably enough. I got week in review. I'll probably end this by 6:30. So I'm going to light my Hanukkah candles very shortly. So also the unity among Jewish people, the importance of Avos Yisrael, the Maggid of Mizrich, was known to say you're required to love a bad Jew just as much as a good Jew. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Demiurge. Tolz Yaakov Yosef, the Baal Tanya, the founder of the Hasidic Movement, 1745 to 1812, and the author of the Tanya, which I talked about in the books that changed my life and showed in my last stream of Kabbalah and Hasidic books. The first statement: every Jew has a divine spark within, which prompts him towards observance of Jewish teachings. The essence of the Torah is love of Israel. There's plenty of Chabad rabbis and English teachings on the Tanya. You don't need Duvid to teach you Tanya. There's plenty of people out there teaching Tanya. So just show like a little slides there. And let me just show a few Wikipedia to cover a few more ideas that are important. So here, if anyone's more scholarly, they could read this. This is an interesting aspect of yichus, which means lineage, and like the marriage practices and like the establishment of dynasties in the early Hasidic movement, which might be related to the population explosion. Also the Misnagdit, the Yeshiva movement, both the Yeshiva movement, which I plan on doing a stream in the future about the history of Yeshiva systems, that comes from the Vilna Gaon and his disciple, Chaim Volozhin, who sets up the first yeshiva in Volozhin and the modern yeshiva system. And eventually there's interplay between the Hasidic movement and the Misnagdit movement, and the yeshiva eventually becomes incorporated into the Hasidic movement. But the large court and these marriage practices of like a royalistic rabbi and trying to marry your children off constantly, our strategy, big families, intermarriage, and that's why I was mentioning, to some extent, Hasidism is almost like a sub-ethnicity of Ashkenazic Jews, because these dynasties of Jews in these towns, and I'm going to show some maps in a second, have basically extended intermarriage between Hasidic groups. So over the 200 years that a lot of these, the disciples of the Maggid Mizrich, who went across Europe and set up rabbinic centers in various towns, and then their sons and students setting up rabbinic centers in all the surrounding towns, so that by 1850 there were basically Hasidic centers in every town and village across Eastern Europe. Over the next 70 years, basically they all intermarry with each other. That Hasidic groups intermarry within other Hasidic groups, where that the Hasidic rabbi came to town, took over a certain section of town, became the dominant preacher of the town, and so I mentioned this book of the Martin Wodziński, the Jewish studies in Warsaw, and his ethnography, the demography of Hasidism. So here you see the paths of the Maggid is rich, and you can see this a few thousand mile, like 1,000 mile by 1,000 miles, and in the second, third generation, the Baal Shem Tov himself traveled quite a bit, but you had students that went all across Eastern Europe, and many of them set up centers in those period of time. And then those that became dynasties, their sons and grandsons and students took over all the surrounding towns. So like for Schneier Zolman, Lubavitch, so here you have Lubavitch on the map. So his students end up largely taking over this whole region. And this already the 1800s, so like by 1850, almost all of the small towns that had Jews in them in this area are under the control of Chabad, and almost all of those people are intermarrying within each other. So that's why almost Hasidism, like different groups like Ger, Belz, Satmar, Lubavitch are almost like sub-ethnicities, like genetically distinct through intermarriage. Here you have some of the first Hasidic settlements in Israel. Here is in the year 1900, where you could see population centers of the size of the box, where the bigger one is up to 260,000 people. So in Vilna, in Warsaw, you had almost 250,000 Hasidim. That's why I said, like, the demography, where there was only, in 1700, there was only like 1.5 million Jews in the whole world. And by 1940, there's close to 16 million Jews, of which in 1890, there's about 12 million Jews, of which 10 million of them live in Eastern Europe. So in 1900, there might be about 10, 12 million Jews, and 80% of all Jews in the world live in Eastern Europe. And here you see towns like, the number, this is just Hasidim, and there are other Hasidim, maybe made up the majority of Warsaw, but like, that you had close to 500,000 Jews in certain areas. Also Berlin, periods, other areas in Europe, but most of the Jews were in Eastern Europe. And there's thousands of these towns. Like the small dot has less than 1,000, and you could see towns with 20 to 50,000 Jews, and there's tens of towns. Pinsk, tens of towns that have tens of thousands of Jews in them, and almost all of these towns were destroyed. Actually, World War I, many of the Jews already start. Ryan, happy Hanukkah. Thanks for tuning in from California. So many of these towns already World War I start relocating to urban areas, and then God forbid World War II, almost all of these towns are completely destroyed. Some of the graveyards and shuls still exist, and I showed my books on the synagogue. You see collections of, some of them here would have been, like a Hasidic court. Here you can see a Hasidic town. So usually you had one Hasidic group that dominated. So this is a town of Lowitz, that maybe had tens of thousands of Hasidim. That Ger was the main group, although Ger only represented 30%. And then you have small amounts of other Hasidic groups that are in the town, and they would have had like Shtiblik. So there would have been, like if the Rebbe was there, the Admor there would have been a huge synagogue. Like by the 1850s already, you start having the building of these huge synagogues. And by 1900, you have huge synagogues that held thousands of people. And the rabbi becomes, like the master of ceremonies, where, to small synagogues where, I said like Hasidism, you could almost call like a sub-ethnicity. But it's basically becomes like a complete way of life, where there's a form of Orthodox Judaism, how you pray, how you dress, the rituals. Like I said, like Jews, Orthodox Jews follow the sages of the generation, and generally that means your local Orthodox rabbi. And as Hasidim took over the leadership of local towns across Eastern Europe, they developed ways of life, and the Hasidim, the followers, are distinct by their ways of life, and there might be small differences in how they pray, how they dress, what type of kosher they do, how they pronounce words, and even distinct ethnicities over because they're over thousands of square miles geography, and most of them majority intermarry within their same sex, where they're almost like distinct ethnicities. You could sometimes even tell what type of Hasidic person is just by looking at them. So here's 1918, and you see maps of Hasidic synagogues in the Lower East Side, some in the Upper Manhattan and Williamsburg. Although there weren't many Rebbes, you don't really have many Rebbes coming to America after World War II. There were a handful of like lower tier Rebbes that were in America, but you had, with the expulsion, with the pogroms in 1890 and the waves of 1880s and the wave of Eastern European immigrants of a few million to America, that set up Hasidic Stiblach, where they weren't really Hasidim in the same way they were in Europe, but they still had shuls and they prayed according to the towns they came from and the customs that they came from. Here, God forbid, I'm not sure which synagogue this would have been. Almost everything destroyed World War II, and just the remnants of a major synagogue that stands today. God forbid you see the Holocaust, to say like almost all of the small Jewish towns were destroyed. A lot of the, God forbid, the Jews ended up in the death camps and died. Some of them were able to make it to America or to Israel's or in the DP camps after the war, where they ended up in America or in Israel or Belgium, London, some in South America. These are all from Marcin Wodziński. So here's an interesting demography of Brooklyn. So if you look at Williamsburg is almost 70% Satmar. They have Pupa, Wien, Vižnitz, Sans, a handful of other small groups that are just 1% each, but Satmar dominates Williamsburg. And then in Borough Park, where I was, Satmar is still 28%. There's a few 100,000 Hasidim in Brooklyn, mostly Williamsburg and Borough Park. Then you have Bubov and Bubov 45 making up about 17%. Bells, Ger, Vižnitz, Sans, Rockman's Rivka Square, Pupa, and other. So in Borough Park, you have like 25% unaffiliated Hasidim. So Duvid was kind of like the unaffiliated, like Jake Turks. You're like a popular style that are Hasidic, but don't ascribe to one specific sect. In Jerusalem, you have a lot like that. 40% are unaffiliated, and Breslov is actually the biggest group in Jerusalem. Then you have Tol Zarin, Duvid, Tol Zarin Yitzchak, Karlin Stolen in Israel, Dushinsky, Vižnitz, Chabad, Bian, Satmar, Bells, B'nai Brak, Ger, Vižnitz. Here's Rabbi Matka Duvid Ungar, who Duvid studied under, Bubba 45, still a prominent rabbi today in Borough Park, who is in the process of building the largest synagogue in New York. Who I mentioned, Sharf, of Levi Sharf, of blessed memory, his brother Duvid Sharf, close relation to Jennifer Sharf, who invented luxury nursing homes and donated tens of millions of dollars to Bubba 45 to building the current largest synagogue in New York City, which is under construction now. That's the Crowley Rebbe. And that's the grave of Chabad. So a few more links. Let me just share. So here is the Council of the Four Lands, which Yeshtetl usually refers to the countryside, the Jewish settlement in the countryside of Eastern Europe. So Hasidism starts with the downfall of central authority, where you had what was known as the Council of the Four Lands, where I mentioned Jews were under noble authorship to reside in certain territories and perform certain functions of operating general stores, tax farmers, running inns and bars, and money lending, certain trades like tailors and various things. And when Jews first got there, there was a centralized council of Jewish authority, which was largely destroyed with the Chalmeki massacres. It tried to be reestablished. And so with the rise of Hasidic and the Litvish movement, there wasn't really any centralized control over Jews in Eastern Europe. And that's what allowed the Hasidic movement, with the Baal Shem Tov training his disciples, to basically take over the rabbinic control of Eastern Europe, although it doesn't become centralized. That largely, and the Rebbes usually don't have the contracts with the Polish nobility. So the Polish nobility, still are selling or auctioning off tax farming rights or the rights to be inns or innkeepers or various things to allow Jews to reside in the land. And the Jews have their own leadership. And sometimes they had councils that were intermediaries, and actually it becomes Freemasonry that becomes the intermediary between the Polish nobility and the Jews. So the Rebbes usually were not Freemasons, but there might have been disciples of the Rebbes or Maskilim. It said almost none of the towns were fully Hasidic. So almost, I think 40% from Wodziński's research, there was no Hasidic establishment that was more than 40% Hasidic. So that still included, there would have been some Maskilim, some Jewish converts to Christianity, some Freemasons, some Litvish, some, free thinkers, and the greater negotiation with the Polish nobility. But, just from the history of this Council of the Four Lands, just mention that briefly. Maybe I'll return to that in a different stream. Today, in Israel politics, you have United Torah Judaism, and so now the Hasidic rabbis have power in Israel. So saying, these rabbis, the Motzi Agudas Yisrael, are the spiritual authorities for United Torah Judaism. There's two councils. There's the Litvish Council. So even though historically there was the dispute between, Litvish, Misnagim, the students of the Vilna Gaon, and the Baal Shem Tov, today they're unite together for the Israeli party, United Torah Judaism, that doesn't include Chabad. And there's a council of Hasidic Rebbes and a council of Litvish Rosh Hashivas. So you could see, like the Ger Rebbe, the Vizhnitzer Rebbe, the Belzer Rebbe, the Biana Rebbe, and now they're a part of the ruling politics in Israel, and you see part of the coalition deal that they're even going to be in charge of the army. So even though they're exempted from military service, there's going to be a rabbinic council from the United Torah Judaism that will be in charge of the IDF, even though the people don't really serve in the IDF. And so you have the current members. You have Agudas Yisrael, which are Hasidic, of Ger, Slonim, Bian, Vizhnitz, Klosenberg, Boston, Biala, Belz, and Mudgets. And then you have the Degel Torah branch of Chevron Yeshiva, Rashbi, Panovich, Teres Yisrael, Slobodka, Kol Torah, and Ramat Elchanan. And So ironically now, the political movement of United Torah Judaism includes the Litvish and Hasidim together. At this point today, there's very little difference. I mean, there's substantial difference, but in Israel, they're like a political force of Hasidim and Litvish. And so these Rebbes don't serve in government, but they have the politicians of United Torah Judaism accept the ruling of the sages. So the various people in Netanyahu's cabinet and the handful that will be put into minister positions will voluntarily accept the ruling of the sages, of the Hasidic rabbis. So, when I get more into Hasidic politics, so here you can see the history of Chabad, and as I mentioned, the Alter Rebbe is one of the main disciples of the Maggid of Mizrich, and goes back to his town of Lubavitch. And actually, anyone knows the history, there was Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk and Rav Avram Kalisher, who were from a few hundred Hasidim that moved to Israel in the 1800s, and extended the leadership to Reb Schneur Zalman. And then later there's dispute. Even if you read the Talmud, it mentions the dispute with Avram Kalisher in the very first words of Tanya. Here you could see the Schneerson family till Menachem Mendel, and the seven Rebbes, Dov Ber to the Menachem Mendel, Shmuel, Shlom Dov Ber, Yaakov Yosef, and Menachem Mendel through different lines. Although actually there's a lot of intermarriage, and the Satmar Rebbes are also descended from the Alter Rebbe. It was mentioned that almost all Hasidim are intermarried. Most Hasidim of a group are all cousins with each other, and then the rabbis, kind of modeled after European royalty, all intermarried with each other. Here, Noam Elimelech, who is the progenitor of the majority of modern day Hasidic movements, like Satmar and Bobov, and had his brother Reb Zusha, famous brothers, and was much more strong in his path of Judaism, and becomes a progenitor to Polish Galician and Jewry that includes Bobov. We're mentioning where I studied, so you have Bobov going back to you can see from the Baal Shem Tov to Dov Ber to Eli Melech of Lezhinsk. So this is spiritual leadership to Rav Meir Nosson Halberstam, to Chaim Halberstam, the Divrei of Tzanz, to Bobov, and then there's also Sanz, and as I mentioned, Motke Duvet Ungar, who I studied and served when I was in Brooklyn, who is just a few years younger than my father, almost turning 70 years old. In Israel, I also studied, and in New York under Karlin Stolen. So let me briefly mention so there was Zlotchev, and you have Rav Yechiel Mikkel, who was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov in his last years of his life in the Maggid of Mizrich. He had a study group that first used the words Hasidim, and they studied Kabbalah and had prayer services and chanting, and taught melodies to the Alter Rebbe of Lubavitch. Hopefully I'll chant a few songs with in a second when I light candles, and is the founder of the Zviller Dynasty, although also his granddaughter married with Aaron Karliner, and was also, I mentioned the book on Menachem Feibush, Heller of Feibush, was also part of this circle of Hasidic rabbis. And so in the beginning, today Chabad is very prominent. So Karlin Stolen, or Aaron Karliner, who was a little older than the Alter Rebbe, but traveled around with him, in his day made 60,000 Bali Tshuva, like Chabad in the present day. So Aaron Karliner, who they originated yelling during chanting. They're a relatively big Hasidic group in Borough Park in Jerusalem, and the towns of Karlin and Stolen. And Aaron Karliner was one of the bigger first Rebbes that the lineage lasted till today. But Shlomo Karliner, who was assassinated, God forbid, and a lot of Hasidim believed to be Mashiach ben Yosef, specifically because he was assassinated and shot while praying. So Duvid had studied in Jerusalem at the Karliner Yeshiva and prayed and studied under Karlin. And the last thing I'll mention before I light Hanukkah candles, the Demiurge. So this is an important concept I talk a lot about with Church of Entropy. And I would say the mainstream universal principle of Jewish belief in totality, from Orthodox to secular Jews, is demiurgic and Kabbalistically. And from the understanding, like the Demiurge is mentioned in Plato and the Timaeus, and might have earlier origins in Gnostic. A lot of scholars believe that Kabbalah is basically a form of Neoplatonism, although amalgamated into a Judeo version with the 10 emanations and 4 worlds, but it's a form of Platonism, Neoplatonism. And the Demiurge, which like the artisan in Freemasonry, the grand architect of the universe, which has different understandings, like usually just mean like the fashioner, but meaning the force that drives progress forward. And so Philo talks about the God of the Hebrew prophets as the Demiurge. And for conceptual sake, I'm going to say that basically all Jews conceptualize Judaism as the Demiurge, and meaning to say the force that drives progress forward. And we say, like, what does it mean to be the chosen people? We're like, I am a Jew. I am the force that drives progress forward. And if it's secular liberal Jews, who that means like repair the world or being on the right side of history in social justice, or just thinking that like, okay, like we brought monotheism to the world, we originated all these important ideas, or Jews are disproportionately intelligent and on the forefront of history, that it's really a form of saying like we're the Demiurge, that like I'm a Jew, I'm the Demiurge, I am the force that propels progress forward. And you're from a lot of Litvish Kabbalists, so you had in some schools the rejectors of Kabbalah that rejects this demiurgic understanding, to say God gave us the law, there is no progress, God will redeem us and send us a Messiah, and it's not some sort of step-by-step process. At some point God will reveal Messiah, and we're just subservient to the law. But most Jews believe in the demiurge, and it's the messianic idea that eventually the world will be redeemed and will be unified under the Jewish people, and it will be revealed that the force that pushed progress forward from the beginning of time till the redemption of all of humankind was us, the Jewish people, the demiurge. And Hasidus Kabbalah develops most of the theology, and I'm going to say almost all of Hasidic theology is demiurgic. Almost all of Kabbalistic theology is demiurgic. Chabad is demiurgic in that sense. Saying like you're a Jew, you're the force that pushes progress forward that will eventually lead to Messiah and the redemption of the whole world. And the Lurianic Kabbalah is essentially demiurgic, with the shattering of the vessels and the repairing of the vessels and the expulsion of Israel to the four corners of the world and the ingathering and the redeeming the sparks. So I'm not going to have too much time to talk about Hasidic philosophy today, but I just thought I'd mention the Demiurge and say that, Philo says it, that basically Jews worship the Demiurge, and somebody's saying the Jews are the Demiurge, that as opposed to there being a force, that the force is manifest in a people, and that's the Jewish people, and that's kind of like the Baal Shem Tov saying you have to love a bad Jew just as much as you love a good Jew, because all Jews are the Demiurge, whether we're good or bad. All Jews are the force that drive progress forward. And there could be expansion, retraction, like I mentioned in previous stream, the boom bust cycle of Judaism, of good times, bad times. I've had my share. But saying Jews economically doing well, expanding, then some sort of program, catastrophe, Holocaust, expulsions, plagues, disaster. But that would be, like the Demiurge, growing and growing until it conquers the whole world. And, the Jewish people are the force of the Demiurge that expands and contracts. And even bad Jews, even secular Jews, you'll be genetically, like from a Hasidic perspective, you have a Jewish soul. That means that you're part of the Demiurge. So you're a Jew, you're part of the Demiurge. And, like Adam Green or something like the Kabbalah, the husk, if you're not a Jew, you're not part of the Demiurge. Meaning to say that you're a Jew, good or bad, you're the Demiurge, you're the force that propels progress forward. You're not a Jew, you're not part of this force that propels progress forward. And I'm going to say that's the essential Jewish belief that unifies basically all Jews. Almost all Jews, even secular Jews, even bad Jews, if they hold on to the Jewish name, where, say like, oh, like I'm not really Jewish, or maybe my ancestor's Jewish, but there's nothing to it. But if they hold on to the Jewish name, they're holding on to this demiurgic belief. Like, no, this people that has been propelling progress forward, I'm part of. And, so when I get, maybe next week, I talk more about Kabbalah and Hasidus, I will talk more about the Demiurge. So let me light my Hanukkah candles, and then I'll chant a few songs, and I'll probably sign off for week in review. So tonight is the 8th night of Hanukkah. So encourage people to light 8 candles. And Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu ladlik ner shel Hanukkah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sh'asa nisam lavoseinu bayamim u'em b'zman hazeh. Okay, happy Hanukkah. So tonight's the 8th night. I mentioned in theology that a lot of people of the Kabbalists say that the 8th night of Hanukkah is the end of the Rosh Hashanah cycle. So your Rosh Hashanah, we're written in the book of life. Yom Kippur, we're sealed in the book of life. And on Shemini Atzeret, the last day of Sukkah, where the judgment is sent off, and they say that the last day of Hanukkah is the last time that the judgment could be changed. That if you repent and had a bad judgment on Rosh Hashanah and it was sealed and sent off, that Hanukkah has some element of Rosh Hashanah within it. And so it's a time of somewhat repentance, and also Shovavim, which is an acronym for the 6 parshas. The first parsha of Exodus is a time of judgment. So after Hanukkah, we'll finish up reading the book of Genesis, and we descend into slavery in Egypt. And it said that the Hasidic movement was a European movement, and it comes the dead of the winter. So now it's very cold, and the next 6 weeks is the heart of winter, and so it's the shortest. The sun, after the winter solstice, the shortest days of the year. The nights are the longest. It's the coldest. It's a time of judgment, and there's a certain element of Rosh Hashanah, of judgment, on the 8th day. It's an important day for Kabbalah, Hasidus, and prayer. So let me chant a few songs. This is from Psalm 63. This is credited to be one of the 10 songs of the Alter Rebbe of Chabad. It's possible that it comes from the Baal Shem Tov and of Yechiel Mikkel of Zlachov, that is said to have taught the Alter Rebbe some of the tunes of the Baal Shem Tov. And I've sang this one before. It's one of my favorite. Ak Elohim, Doimi Nafshi, Ak Elohim, Doimi Nafshi, Kimi Meni Sikfusi, Aki Sari Vishuasi, Miskabi Loyib Might. Only to God should you hope, my soul, for my hope is from him. Only he is my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not falter. Yama ma 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 ma. Yama ma 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 mo yo ya. Yama ma ma yo ya. Oh ya ma 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 ma. Yama ma 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 mo yo ya. Yama ma 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 mo yo ya. Yama ma ma. Yama ma 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 ma. Hoyak leilahim. Doi mi nafshi, ki mi mani tikusi, uyaki sari vishiusi. Kimi Miskabi lo yemoid. Ay, ay, yo, 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 mam, ya, mama, yo, yam, ay, ya, mama, yo, yo, mam, ya, mama, yam, ak, lelahim, Dovoi minafshi ki mimeni tikvusi oya kitzuri vishiusi Miskabi lo yemoid. Ayamo yo 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 mam. Ayayayo yo yo. Ayayam yo yo mam. Yamamama. Okay, so let me do a Rosh Hashanah song. Just I was mentioning that the last day of Hanukkah has an element of being like Rosh Hashanah, and that conceivably we could change our judgment. So Ryan, I'm trying to stream now a tour of my library every Wednesday, and then on Saturday night, which ended up being Sunday today, to do another Jewish stream. So thanks for tuning in. So these words are from Rosh Hashanah. I've mentioned them before. One of my favorite tunes to chant, another Vishnitz tune. Vieta kol poil kiatu fiel tov yovin kol yitzir kiatu yitzar tov. You know everything because you are the all-knower. You know all that is because you cause all that is to happen. B'yomer kol asher neshuma b'yapo Hashem Elokei Yisrael Melech Yisrael, and on that day, all the souls will call out to our King, the God of Israel, would declare God our King. Vieda kol poil kiatu fialtoi v'yovin kol yitzir kiatu yitzartoi v'yedu kol poil kiatu fialtoi v'yovin kol yitzir kiatu yitzartoi v'yedu kol poil kiatu fialtoi v'yovin kol yitzir kiatu yitzartoi v'yoymar 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 kol asher neshuma b'yapoi Asher Melekei Yisrael Melech Malchisu Baku Mishula Malchisu Bachu Meshula. Okay, so with that, God bless. People should you have a good kvittel, a good tidings. You know, the last day of Hanukkah, whatever judgment is here on the world this year, corresponding with Christmas. So, you know, Merry Christmas to those, but corresponding this day on the lunar calendar with the 8th day of Hanukkah, that has an element like a mini Rosh Hashanah. So tidings to good things to all people. So let me pour myself a quick drink, and I'll chant a few more songs. So here's a Sklender tune from Psalm 33. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reinu megenu hu, kibo yismak l'meinu, kibashem kadsho bataknu. My soul ignites for God, my help and my shield. To God, my heart is happy because we trusted in his holy name. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reini umaginohu. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reini umaginohu. Ki boy yismak libeini, ki b'shem kachor butakni. Ki boy yismak libeini, ki b'shem kachor butakni. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reini umaginohi. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reini umaginohi. Ki boy yismak l'beini, ki b'shem kachor butakni. Ki boy yismak l'beini, ki b'shem kachor butakni. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reini umaginohi. Nafsheni hiksu l'shem as reini umaginohi. Ki boy yismak l'beini, ki b'shem kachor butakni. Ki boy yismak l'beini, ki b'shem kachor butakni. And go to Psalm 34. This one, I think it's a vision that's soon. The Tolstoy Yitzchak Rebbe used to chant this one, call and response from verse Psalm 34, verse 2, 3, and 4. Vorkos Hashem b'kol ace. I will bless the Lord at all times. Tomid bishal l'bafi. His praise constantly on my lips. Bashem tisalu nafshi. Yisma'u anovim yismachi. My soul shall glory God. The humble shall hear and be glad. Godly l'shem iti. Uroim mishmo yagdov. And magnify the Lord, and let us exalt God's name together. Ovorchu es Hashem b'kol eis, Tomid tisalel b'fi, B'Hashem tisal nafshi, Yismi anovim yismelchi. Ovorchu es Hashem b'kales. Tumi tisalil b'fi. B'Hashem tisalil nafshi. Yismu anovim yismelchi. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo yagdo. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo shmo yagdo. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo yagdo. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo shmo yagdo. That one's actually very nice to chant with congregationally together. The last words, Uraimo mushmo yagdov, and we should praise God's name together. Ovorchu es Hashem b'kales, Tomi tisalil b'fi, B'Hashem tisalil nafshi, Yismi anovim yismelchi. Ovorchu es Hashem b'kales, Tomi tisalil b'fi, B'Hashem tisalil nafshi, Yismu anovim yismelchi. Oy gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo yagdo. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo shmo yagdo. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo yagdo. Gadli Lashem iti, Uraimo mushmo shmo yagdo. Okay, now here on Psalm 34, I will chant another good Sklen tune. This old, from the Sklen Rebbe back in Europe, from verse 10 through 15. The fear of the Lord is holy, for as though there's no want for those who fear God. Yeah, Jim, happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas. Thanks for tuning in. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they seek the Lord and don't lack any good. Come, my children, listen to me, and I will teach you fear of God. Who is the man that desires life and loves days to see good? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking bad. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. Yiras Hashem kedoshav ki ein makser l'reyav kefir rashu v'reyu v'dor sheyashem l'yakser l'koltov. I'm forgetting actually how the tune goes. L'chi bunim, l'chi bunim, l'chi bunim shimuli. Yiras Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Yiras Hashem melametchem. L'chi bunim, l'chi bunim, l'chi bunim shimuli. Yiras Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Yiras Hashem melametchem. Mi yuish hechafetz chayim. Oyev yamim li rois toiv, noitzer l'soimka meira, unv'saka midaber meira, si meira, v'yaseh tov, bakei shalom, bakei shalom, bakei shalom rafeu, l'chi bunim, shimuli, Yiras Hashem, Yiras Hashem, Yiras Hashem Alamitchem. That was a popular Sklanner tune that was more sung for kids. I guess the words were pretty important. It said the Chibunim, listen to me, children, and I will teach you fear of God. Who desires life and to see good days? Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from speaking bad. Turn away from bad and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. So let me look for another song to chant. So while I'm looking, I'm just going to chant this. This is actually from Avinu Malkeinu, popular song, Tiye Yeshua Zoi Shas Rakamim, B'Yes Ritzoin Milfanecha, like the Rosh Hashanah, the last day of Hanukkah, is Eitz Ritzon, a special day where our prayers are listened to, that, Kabbalistically, God works in mysterious ways, but one of those is the establishment of the holidays, and that there's certain special times of the year that are more opportune for prayer to be accepted and listened to. Tiye Yashu Azois Shas Rachamim B'Yes Ritzoin Milfunechu 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 Tiye Yashu Azois Shas Rachamim B'Yes Ritzoin Milfunechu. So this is always a good one to chant. Actually, the Ramchal in Mesilas Yesharim, The Path of the Just, recommends in multiple chapters chanting this verse. Psalm 51, verse 12 and 13. Leiv Tahor Borli Yohim Baruch Nachoin Kadosh B'Kirbe Al Tash Lekeni Milfanechu V'Ruach Kajkal Tikak Mimeni. Create in me a clean heart and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Don't cast me away from your presence, and don't take your Holy Spirit away from me. And I think this is actually a Litvish tune, like a Pirkei tune from like the 50s. But popular tune, pretty well known among religious Jews and even maybe secular Jews. And the mantra is one of the more popular mantras in Psalms. Many of the sages recommend chanting this Lev Tor Borili Elohim Ruach Nochain Kadesh Bekirvi Lev Tor Borili Elohim Ruach Nochain Kadesh Bekirvi Al tashlicheni milfunechu ruach kodshechu al tikach mimeni Al tashlicheni milfunechu v'ruach kodshechu al tikach mimeni Lev tu abori li Elohim Ruach Nochain Kadesh Bekirbi Lev tu abori Elohim Ruach Nochain Kadesh Bekirbi Al tashlicheni milfunechu v'ruach kodshechu al tikach mimeni al tashlicheni milfunechu v'ruach kodshechu al tikach mimeni. Okay, so let me try to wrap off. Let me do one more tune to kind of be a blessing to everybody. I chanted this one this week, but one of my favorite, Psalm 21, verse 5 and 6. Chaim shual mimchu, life we ask from you, nasatu lo. Thou give it to him. Orik yamim, oilam vuad, long days forever and ever. Gadol kavodoi. Great is his glory, bishuasechu, in your salvation. Hod v'hodar, honor and majesty, teshaveh law, that you lay upon him. So bless everybody watching, everybody out there for Hanukkah, that people should be blessed with long life, health, happiness, honor, glory, and majesty, wealth, all the blessings, your big family, all of their heart's desires in a kosher way. Chaim shual mimchu nu satuloi oirek oirik yamim oilam v'ed chayim shuel mimchu nu satuloi oirik yamim oilam v'ed gudol kivoidoi b'shiyusechu hoid v'hudar tishaveu lav gudol kivoidoi b'shiyusechu hoid v'hodar tishaveu lav chayim shuel mimchu nu satuloi oirik yamim oilam v'ed chayim shuel mimchu nu satuloi oirik yamim oilam v'ed gudol kivoidoi b'shiyusechu hoid v'hudar tishaveu lav gudol kivoidoi b'shiyusechu hoid v'hodar tishaveu lav chayim shuel mimchu nu satuloi oirik yamim oilam v'ed chayim shuel mimchu nu satuloi oirik yamim oilam v'ed gudol kivoidoi b'shiyusechu hoid v'hodar tishaveu lav. Okay, that one was one of my favorite, so just I'm inspired to do a few more chants. So I'm at it. It was about Rabbi Jewry. So I served the Nickelsburger Rebbe, Rabbi Jewry, still out there, maybe strong. He started the shul upstate, and he made up his own songs. And what was sung? Forget my perky almost. Forgetting something like Amei Kulam Sadikim. The whole nation is righteous, which comes from, like I said, the demiurgic understanding that all Jews are the force of the demiurge. And so the verse in Isaiah of Amei Kulam Sadikim, even bad Jews, the whole nation is righteous. And said at the beginning of Perkei Avos from Isaiah 60:21, V'yamei kulam sadikim lo'ilam yirshbu oretz. V'yamei kilam sadikim, 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 V'yamekilim 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 sadikim. And do one more song as a blessing to everybody listening. This one is Proverbs 3:2. Ki orik yamim ushnois chaim ulushalom yosifi loy. So this should be a blessing to everybody listening, that you should have long days and years full of life, and peace and plenitude should fill you. So just a generic blessing to all those listening. This is a very popular Hasidic tune, one of the more popular widespread modern Hasidic tunes. Ki yoyrek yamim shnava vavois chayim, ki yoyrek yavamim ushnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yamim shnava vavois chayim, ki yoyrek yavamim shnavois chayim, chayim shulam, chayim v'shulam, chayim shulam, yosifi lak, chayim shulam, chayim v'shalom, chayim shalom, yosifi lak, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yamim, ushnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yamim, ushnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yamim, shnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yavamim ushnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yamim shnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yavamim ushnavois chayim, chayim shulayim, chayim v'shulayim, chayim shulam, chayim v'shulayim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yavamim ushnavois chayim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yamim, ki yoyrek yavamim ushnavois chayim. And just for the sake of brotherhood, and I'll do the famous Psalm 133, Hine matov umanoim shevazachim gam yachad. Hine matov umanoim shevazachim gam yachad. How pleasant it is for brothers to sit together in peace. Hine matov umanoim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov umanoyim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov umanoyim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine ma tov umanoyim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. And for the sake of Black Jewish relations, I will also chant the Harry Belafonte tune, Tahine Matov. The Harry Belafonte, who was a friend of Israel, dated a Jewish woman, the singer of the Deo song. Hine matov umanayim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine matov umanayim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine matov yananai nananai nananai. Hine matov yananai nananai nananam. Hine matov umanayim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Hine matov umanayim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad. Actually, Harry Belafonte, 95 years old, still alive, who did his own popular version to Hine Matov. So God bless. With that, happy Hanukkah. I'm going to sign off. I'll be back in 20 minutes with Church of Entropy for weekend review. So may the spirit of Hanukkah provide blessings for the whole world, the holiday. The Christians listening, Merry Christmas. And, the special merit that Christmas and the last day of Hanukkah fall on the same day, and the element of the day, judgment. So special providence that, the last day of Hanukkah has a special power to bring good things into the world. And, God forbid, we'll be entering the darkest time of winter. The Kabbalists say the first 6 parshas, starting the week after next, are the darkest time of judgment, the shortest days of the winter, the coldest time of the year, and a time to repent and fast and take Torah study extra hard. So hopefully I will be able to do a regular Saturday night stream for the next few weeks, and hopefully have some good stuff to share. Jim, appreciate you being in my chat. If you want to have a talk, Jim, you want to stream or something, let me know if you have like a topic or like some history or something you want to discuss, some intellectual topic. Samish, Hi T, Wesley, everybody in the chat, appreciate you tuning in. So happy Hanukkah, and be blessed. If you want more, stick around, and we can review in 20-30 minutes on Church of Entropy. Wednesday, tour of my library. I will doing my Christian books. So I have 3 shelves of Christian books. Some interesting books, different Bibles. I have 2 shelves of books that I've read, and I have another, like 25 books that I haven't read yet. So I will be going over some of my Christian books. Some of them are pretty interesting. And let me know. You can reach out, find me on Twitter, or put a comment on. And, if you have some sort of interesting topic that you think would be interesting, you want to have a conversation, let me know. So happy Hanukkah, everybody. Be blessed.